Neil, I have to say, that mustache, superb. Superb, my friend. Superb. For everybody who's just starting to join us here, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to start right up at 11. But if you are starting to populate, feel free to hit the chat button at the bottom. And feel free to let us know where you're from and what brought you here today, what success looks like for you. I'm sure Neil and I will play along. So let us know where you're from and what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. And we'll start in just a few minutes.
We got one more minute to 11, so there we are.
Andrew, good to have you here. Andrew is a past PDC student and from hopefully melting Victoria, Andrew. I know you guys got about 60 centimeters from the last couple of weeks. It's crazy to watch the amount of snow that landed on the island. So for anybody else who's just joining, feel free to hit the chat button and let us know where you're from and what success looks like for you for the webinar. Maybe it's just listening and learning. Maybe it's you really want to know how to get Neil's mustache. I'm pretty stoked on Neil's mustache. It's amazing. So I don't know if he's going to be giving a how-to during this webinar, but it's possible. It's possible. I wouldn't say it's another question. How do we say that? Hillary? Hillary's? I don't know where your first name ends and your last name begins, or maybe it's all your first name, but thanks so much for coming in from New Orleans. Yes, it is Hillary. Thank you. You saved me from continually embarrassing my pronunciation. Great to have you here. Both Hillary and Andrew, because you guys have already posted, what brought you in today? Stoked to hear about that. For everybody else, feel free to pop down where you're from and what brought you here today. And we'll just start in a few minutes. It's kind of the beginning webinar lull where we sip our tea and wait for a few more folks to jump in. Mary, thanks so much for being here from Portland.
Poland, it looks like.
Mary, were you in the Advanced Climate Resiliency Program? I feel like there was a student I knew, Susan from the South Shuswap area in British Columbia, fairly new resident to the area, trying to figure out water collection for my sunny South Slope. Yep, that's a big conversation. I've done a fair bit of work in the Okanagan. I still, technically live kind of close to the Okanagan. Eleanor from 100 Mile House, need to dust off some brain cells, 6+ years post PDC. Yeah, it takes some time. Thanks, Eleanor, for jumping back in. And nice to hear from 100 Mile House. I've been working on a fire documentary called Facing Fire, Building Resiliency to Wildfire, and amazing to take a look at just the response and the spread and the conversation in and around your area there. I don't know if the fires up there affected you or not. Mexico! Thanks so much from Permacultura, learning from permaculture. Great to have you. Thanks so much.
Chris Moore from
Hillary, I work around green infrastructure, lots of change. Oh, Chris Moore!
Welcome, Chris.
Good colleague and friend, Chris Moore. Woody rhino pastured pigs, some of the best pigs you can get. Level up design skills and see your beautiful faces. Chris, I'm thinking of your beautiful face. So there we go. Donna from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Down in Neil's territory.
Yeah, I love Santa Fe. I've done some work there, more in northern New Mexico, near the New Mexico-Colorado border in the mountains. Some watershed restoration and wildland construction work. Santa Fe is a great place, home of the Bear Coalition and Holistic Management International. as well as many other permaculture pioneers and practitioners. Carol from Pender Harbor on the Sunshine Coast. The Sunshine Coast of which country? I'm guessing maybe Australia? Or is that a Canadian?
Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, Neil. British Columbia.
Okay.
That's my bet. I've been at that area. Nora Swan from Ukulik, BC, working with biodynamic agriculture and interested in learning about food forestry. Absolutely, Nora. Great conversation. I've got a client in Ukulik right now who's living in a tiny house. Christopher Farrow. Christopher was an incredible student in the Regenerative Business Mentorship Program that myself and Rob Avis put together. Amazing, man. If you're a creative and you're looking for career and career advice for creatives, Chris does a great job. When we were brainstorming his tagline for his business, I think it was helping musicians get off music labels, kind of like helping people get off drugs. He's amazing at what he does there. Land design patterns, so I could transfer them to creative career design consulting work. Also want to see your beautiful faces. Thank you. Thank you. We put them on just for today. So for everybody else that's just joining us, Javan Bernakevitch here with Neil Bertrando. And please do drop us a line on the chat on the right-hand side. Just let us know where you're from. Let us know what you're hoping to get out of today. Great to hear from everybody. Really stoked to see the numbers climbing. We're at 39 right now. We're told that there was 170 odd some folks who signed up, so great to see the numbers. Sambit from Odisha, India. I'm here to listen and learn. Sambit, thanks so much for calling in from India. Amazing to see everybody from all the different places. And from Butte Country, California, working on some folks from the Campfire Restoration Project. Fantastic. Fantastic, Anne. Love to hear about that. I just had an email from Hannah Apricot this morning. I don't know if you're down there working with her, but great to see folks from all over. So today, folks, what we're going to be doing and kind of talking about is we're going to be talking about general problems with design and land design, permaculture design, regenerative design. It's a big conversation. It's a big world out there. And one of the things that both Neil and I have found time and time again, because we both work with Oregon State University, amazing permaculture design program developed by Marisha Arbuck and Andrew Millison, is that a number of the students we meet with and converse with, they have major tripping hazards, the things that they trip over time and time again. And even colleagues of ours that we've seen trip over some common things. So we wanted to put together this webinar to talk about those and talk about an opportunity in further mentorship if anybody's keen. But the focus here is really to talk about some of these lessons that we've brought to the forefront. If you're new to Zoom, basically we've got a chat bar at the bottom. Means you can talk openly or you can direct your chat to specific folks. We also have a Q&A box at the bottom, and if there are any questions about anything we're talking about, we'll take them at the end. So definitely preload your questions. We'll be taking them purely by this Q&A, so type them in. I'm going to do a little presentation. Neil's going to do a presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. So if something pops up and you don't want to lose it, feel free to put it in the Q&A. We'll ignore it for the time being, but at the end, we'll definitely pick it up and start to jump into it. I just see that somebody threw their introduction into the Q&A, so I'll just pick up Sandra. Sandra Ungerson from Salt Spring Island, BC, rainwater harvesting practitioner, designing, installing, and maintaining rainwater collection systems for residential, commercial, agriculture, and fire suppression purposes. Fantastic, Sandra. I've got a couple of clients on Salt Spring, plus a couple of really good colleagues. I've lived and worked there as well. So great to have you here, and thanks so much for being here. Really, really stoked to have you. Who else do we got? We got Naomi. Hey, Naomi, from Canada's national capital. Can't get enough of Javan. Oh, that's really sweet of you. Great to see Neil. Been a fan. Neil, you have a fan. There we go. Stay in the loop. Awesome. Tin. Hello, Tin. Tin's in our Oregon State University permaculture design course. And she is the person I was just thinking of. And she's from Brentwood, so just across the bay over on the west coast of British Columbia. So great, folks. I think that's about as long as we were going to wait. So I think I'll do my introduction first, although I have taken a lot of space. But the way that we're doing this, we're going to bounce back and forth. So Neil, if you will graciously allow me to continue to babble, I shall babble a bit more.
I can do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Javan Bernakevitch, and I have been involved with regenerative land care, land design, permaculture since 2009. So I'm coming up on my first decade anniversary of being involved in this space, and it's been a fascinating time to be involved. I'm sure, as many of you know, the Chinese curse of the Chinese blessing, may you be so blessed to be born in very interesting or challenging times, and we are that. There is more problems than we can shake a stick at, but at the same time, that challenge calls us to be more present, more able, and to expand our abilities. And I think that's one of the neatest things about this work is that it's not that the wave's coming, the wave's here. And what Neil and I want to do with our lives is help as many people as possible learn to surf some of these changes and these conversations with really practical solutions. And one of the neat things about both of us, and I think this is why we've become good friends and colleagues, is that I have an open toolbox. I've learned from everyone. I've learned from permaculture, biodynamics. I've learned from agrarians. I've learned from Jeff Lawton. I've learned from Sepp Holzer. I've decided that I need to open up the toolbox wide and put as many tools in there and then have a really good conversation about diagnostics and assessment to know when and where to use those tools. So I took my PVC in 2009. I immediately jumped in head, hands, and feet, as my good friends in Cuba would say. And I've been involved in designing and educating folks the world over. I've worked in Kenya, Uganda. I've consulted remotely in Mongolia and India. I've worked down in Cuba. I've worked both in Canada and in the USA. And I've taught internationally. I'm at my 46th PDC. I've got 1,000 PDC students, 997 as of today, plus many more when it comes to other types of works and conversations. And over the last 5 years, I've been involved in life design. I've been involved with helping individuals understand specifically what they're moving and going through when it comes to mindset, when it comes to making good decisions, when it comes from knowing where your zones of brilliance are, the places where you excel. And I couldn't be more excited about being in this workspace. I think it's a great space to be in. And if we can help you in any way, shape, or form to continue to step into the space in a small way or big way, it would be a great pleasure. I'm going to pass it over to Neil to introduce himself, but I will first say that Neil is one of the best designers I've ever worked with. And I include all those individuals I just spoke about. I'm sure this is a little panagerizing, but Neil has an incredible focus and attention to detail that is very rare. And we met about 6-7 years ago at a Sepp Holzer workshop in Montana, and have since connected. And I really look to him because of his eye for design and his practical sensibility. So Neil, if you will take it away and introduce yourself and your mustache, that would be fantastic.
All right, thank you, Javan. Well, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Neil Bertrando. I live in Reno, Nevada, high desert. It's both cold and dry. We're winter wet when we're cold and dry in the summer when it's warm enough to actually grow most things. So it presents its own set of interesting challenges. I took my PDC in 2004 with Eric Olson and Starhawk. So I'm really excited to be collaborating with the Permaculture Skills Center on this webinar and rekindling some of my relationship with Eric Olson and the amazing work that he and all of the folks around him are doing at Permaculture Skills Center. Very, very inspiring. I've been teaching PDCs since about 2009. I've taught about 25 PDCs, a little over 350 students, and I'm really excited to expand on that, to integrate some advanced courses, as well as to share what I've learned through my design, build, and maintenance practice. I've been working both. I came from a biological and environmental sciences background to this work, and I've worked in environmental restoration projects, both uplands and riparian and wetland areas. I've done design, build, maintenance for everything from small urban sites to large suburban sites to rural residential and small farm sites. And so I come to this from a very practical based perspective where design really gets tested when the rubber meets the road, when you have to actually implement it and then maintain and manage it through time to actually achieve the beneficial yields that we talk about during the design and diagnostic process. So I'm really excited to share just some of what I've learned through kind of my iterations and evolutions of working with landscapes that I've designed and built and maintained, and just share some of those insights with you guys, and hope that they provide you with an opportunity to save some time and get better results from your energy. So I'll hand it back to Javan to take us on to the next stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Neil. I'm just going to welcome a few more folks who are decided to put their names, conversations down. Daryl from Ashland, PDC in 2006. Daryl, thanks so much for being here. Brian from Goonieland Permaculture Farm. Brian, so good to have you here. Specializing in natural buildings, specifically hempcrete and earth shops. We are planning an expansion into craft medicinal hemp products, looking into regenerative organic certification. Brian's an incredible practitioner. We met at a PDC a couple of years ago. Thanks so much for being here, Brian. Lior, I'm going to go out on a limb there, from California and Israel, work in design and implementation of food forests. Met Eric back when I was working with Planting Justice. Now I'm setting up a collective food forest business in Israel. Fantastic. And doing Elaine Ingham's certification program. Fantastic. Great to hear. Elaine's doing exceptional work, and I love her new work with the new Soil Food Web company. Great to see. So, folks, I'm going to jump into my little 15 minute conversation, more like 15, less like 20. And then I'll pass it over to Neil. I'll be talking specifically about saving money in pre-purchase and using digital assets to help us make good decisions in pre-purchase and also in design. One of the things that Neil and I and our colleagues are finding more and more is that when somebody jumps into a permaculture design course or jumps into regenerative agriculture or jumps into any number of these courses, there tends to be a bit of a magic bullet, silver bullet conversation, thinking that if I have this knowledge, I can have exactly what I want, doesn't matter where I am. And if that's what you believe, I'm sorry to say, I'm here to tell you that in my experience, that hasn't been the case. I've found time and time again that taking a big step back and understanding the three major spheres within design, first and foremost, and then going into them, is one of the major stumbling blocks with clients, with students, with colleagues, you name it. So what are those three spheres? What are the three spheres that you and I and everyone we know really need to start focusing upon? So first and foremost, it's the client. And so if the client's you, if you're a self-designer, fantastic. If you do this professionally for other people, fantastic. But we need to understand the person. We need to understand, first and foremost, what is it that they want? And not, I want a monkey puzzle tree in my yard and I just have to find the yard to put the monkey puzzle tree in. That's a real example that I dealt with this past year. But what are the values? What's the sense that they want to have? Do they want a sanctuary? Do they want to have clean drinking water? Do they want to have space and time to be with their family? Because some of those quality of lives that individuals want preclude some systems. If individuals are looking to farm and they want tons of time with their family, and their family is not necessarily going to be working in the farm, there are a couple of farming systems that aren't going to work because of the intensity or the time that it takes or the type of plants that are used. It's definitely a question that comes up in the permaculture design certificates that Neil and I put together and work in all the time, is that individuals don't think about that first and foremost. And that is the first constraint we have to think about. In many other industries, constraints are quote unquote, bad word. They're not a good thing. But in this type of design, in regenerative agriculture and permaculture, constraints are necessary. They help us to know what isn't supposed to go where. And sometimes that means a positive negative. So if a client comes up and says, I want you to make me a Haskap farm on the west coast of Vancouver Island on the west side of British Columbia, which is where I am in Canada. And you go, I love it. I love Haskaps, first bearing, very sweet, amazing, very cold, hardy from Mongolia. But you're on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and now we get into the biophysical sphere, and it's not cold enough. You don't get the chill hours to increase the amount of sugar in the sap, which isn't going to make a great berry, which isn't going to give it resilience in the summer sun in Vancouver and on the west coast. So all of a sudden we start getting these constraints. And so we need to understand that first sphere, the client sphere, who they are, what their desires are, what their wants are, what their values are, how much time they have to put into a site. Big point here that Neil will touch upon. How much time do we have to actually set up these systems, maintain these systems, and harvest these systems? A lot of folks don't think about harvest, but I can tell you, when you're finally sitting there with all of this vegetation, all this fruit, there's a real question of how am I going to get this into a form that I can capture and store this into the winter months, into the fall, into value-added conversations that I can then trade for income. How can I meet my farm status? All of these become big questions. So client first and foremost. Second is biophysical. And this is something I think most people in permaculture, regenerative agriculture really get excited about. What can the land do? And it's just one of three. So again, it should be about a third of the effort or a third of the conversation. Biophysical has to do with all of the different sector conversations, the aspect, the slope, the wind, the sun, the rain, taking a look at neighbors, social demographics, taking a look at psychographics, who's around us, what's their conversation. Those are all really important things. And I'm going to show you some interesting tools that I found that are great for analyzing and then diagnosing this conversation. And then finally, last but not least, that last sphere, regulatory bodies. What is the sphere or the climate of regulation that we live in? I think everybody has heard about a designer or two that has parachuted into a place and said, great, this is where the ponds go, this is where the swales go, and then all of a sudden say, we can't do that here. That's not part of the regulatory framework. And then there's a big upset. I know Neil and I both saw that a couple of years ago when Sepp Holter came to Boise, Idaho, and was throwing a bit of a tantrum because he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And yet we live in constraints. There are constraints in this world that we have to work within. Nothing against Sepp, love him. Can't touch his work with a 140-foot pole. That's kind of the sphere and the size that he works at. He works at a watershed conversation, but at the level that we work at, in a residential conversation, in a rural conversation, we have to decide the battle we want to fight. And is the battle changing a regulation that has been in place for tens or hundreds of years? Or is it working within that framework, potentially finding the variances and the allowances, and then working to find yes within that framework, like a number of my clients and I have done? And so those three spheres are really important. You have to think about the client, the biophysical, and also the regional climate, the regulatory climate. And from there, this is the next big thing that I think a lot of folks forget, is that first and foremost, the most important value that we provide for clientele, or ourselves or others, is that of analysis and diagnosis. When you go to a doctor, the most valuable portion of that doctor's visit is diagnosis. Is going through the symptoms, going through the tests, going through the data, going through the overlays, and understanding what the symptoms are, and more importantly, where they're coming from and what the cause of those symptoms are. Not trying to put a Band-Aid over a symptom, but understanding where that comes from. And this is where simple design really becomes paramount, because once you find the root cause, if you can work within the root cause, a number of the symptoms start to evaporate. I think of a landscape on the west coast of British Columbia I worked on, and we ended up taking a look at the water issue, and we found that it was actually a collection issue within the watershed, and a few small implementations, small, subtle work changed the entire conversation for their slope and site. So diagnosis is one of the biggest things that I find that is not prevalent in a permaculture mindset, in a regenerative agriculture mindset. It's, okay, where do we put the keyline system? Well, take a step back. Do we need to work into keyline geometry? Take another step back. Do we need to do anything on this site? And that can be really frustrating for folks that have come into a course because they want to do something. And it kind of goes back to Tom Brown's idea of what's the loudest thing in the forest? The human mind. What does it sound like? It sounds like a trash can falling down suburbia at 3 a.m. in the morning. The most important question we can ask when we come into a site, into a person's conversation in life design and land design is, what's going on here? And do it from about 2.5, 3 feet tall. Like, do it as a kid, being like, what's happening here? Why is that happening? Why is this connecting? And so that's a really important piece. That's sort of the framework I want to lay before I jump into this case study. Because that conversation, if you take nothing away from this webinar, except for that conversation, diagnosis, those three spheres, understanding assessment, understanding diagnosis, and asking that question, why, over and over again, that will take you farther than any technique. That'll take you farther than any swale, any hugelkultur, any keyline geometry, any pasture rotation. Understanding the deep question of why and why these things are important. I cannot stress this enough. If you're thinking that this is, silly and out there, I really implore you to think about the last time you made a poor decision or saw a poor decision being made and the results were irreversible and consequential, being the utmost decision-making conversation, and what the effect was, and could it have been changed if we had gone to why. So consider that as I go throughout this presentation, because I think you'll find that it has a real key piece. And if you're having aha moments, or if you're having excited connections and conversations, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll definitely check in on them. So just going to share my, my screen here. And Neil, give me the thumbs up there if we can see the slide that's up currently. Big thumbs up. Okay. You always got to wait for Neil's thumbs up. That's where the good thumbs come from. So I've been playing and working with Google Earth Pro for, you like that one, eh? I've been playing and working with Google Earth Pro for about 5-6 years. And about 4 or 5 years ago, when Neil and I came together for a workshop, he showed me that the scale of permanence, originally created by P.A. Yeomans, who was the founder of Keyline Design, was a great way to start to itemize and segregate and segment all of the design information that we were starting to collect. I ended up working with a great colleague and friend of mine, Dakota Cohen, and he ended up being able to show and to change this even more so. So we've definitely been able to work with this in a way that's been very, very useful going forward. So here we are in this site. It's a small valley, and this was the proposed boundary of this site. And as you can see, above this site, this property, which is in interior British Columbia, there's been a rock slide. It happened around the 1960s, and there was another rock slide here roughly 10,000 years ago due to geological evidence. So first and foremost, when we're playing and starting to work with these conversations, I go to find good topographic information. Now, NASA flew a shuttle over the world going about 2000, and they flew over the world and they took LiDAR, which is basically firing a laser down into the Earth, and then how it bounces back and its frequency and its intensity lets them know what the topography of the Earth is. It's an amazing data set. Google Earth itself and Google Earth Pro are based upon this data set. The problem is that a pixel is 30 meters, which means that if you're trying to get resolution under 30 meters, there's going to be a variance, or there's going to be some error, roughly 2 to 7 meters on the vertical axis on the elevation. So if you're working on a watershed scale like we are here, fantastic source of information. If you're trying to place a pond to make sure it's level, which is now getting into the centimeter or sub-centimeter conversation, you need to find different data and different sources. But that's where this data set is from. I've actually got a video coming out within the next couple of weeks about that data set. So if folks are interested, feel free to drop me a line. So we start off here, and we need to figure out a few things. First and foremost, we need to understand what's the topography like. So what we end up using is I'm just going to scroll down here. We end up building these contours off of that data set through a program called ArcGIS. You can also use a freeware program called QGIS, or you can work with individuals who are exceptional at doing this work, which I do. I partner and have a great colleague named Brent Smith with Paper Street Permaculture, who loves this work and does exceptional map work. So he's a great collaborator. We don't have to learn everything about this work. We can work with exceptional individuals. So this is the 20-meter contour, and it gives me a good sense generally where we're looking and what the conversation is. And as you can see, we've got a general valley form in the valley, which is good to see. And we've got a couple of little valley forms and potentially avalanche dangers. So that starts to get my brain turning. Okay, what am I doing here? What's important here? Okay, so Neil's saying that we can't see the 20-meter contour right now. Neil, is that right? Is it still stuck?
I can't see it.
Okay. But is it just on the...
I don't know what are other folks still seeing the first slide, or do you not see the 20-meter contour of the second slide?
Good question. I don't see it yet. Hey, Neil, let's move directly to Plan B here, eh?
Yep, sounds good.
So I'm going to stop share, folks. I got waylaid in the mountains. We had a furnace issue and a snow issue, and ended up getting stuck up here, and then got a snowstorm, and I'm on satellite internet, which means there's a bit of a lag. So I've sent this presentation already to Neil, and Neil's actually going to be the one who's going to put up the slide, and I might actually turn off my my video. Neil, has my audio been okay?
Yeah, audio has been good. So I shared.
Okay, well, I might.
Can you see that now?
Perfect. I can see that, and this is great because I'll be the feedback loop here. Awesome. Can everybody else see Neil's? Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. Awesome. So this was the 20-meter contour conversation I was talking about, again, from that NASA information from the flyover in 2000. And we've got a great-looking valley form in the middle, and we've got a couple of drainages off to the east and off to the west. Much better. Thanks so much, Lior. So if we go to the next slide, again, this is all in Google Earth Pro, but because of our bandwidth issues, we decided to put it into this slideshow. So Neil, if you just want to scroll down to the next one. Nice. This is what happens when we get into a 5-meter contour. Now, because this is a great example, because this data set is based on a 30-meter pixel, you can see that there's a lot of patterning that happens at 5 meters. There's a lot of interpolation, and it's not totally representative of the site. So again, really consider if you have to take your contours off of Google Earth Pro, chances are they're not going to be accurate. Neil, I'll get you to go on to the next slide. Now, next, when we take a look at this, we want to take a look at watershed and water capture. And one of the great things when you're working in a GIS program that has this type of conversation is you can get into what's called a watershed flow. And this watershed flow, as we're seeing here, actually shows us the drainages and the total amount of watershed capture. So at the bottom there, you can see the legend as we get to yellow, it's 50,000 to 100,000 meters per square. And as we move up to the blues and the purples at the bottom, we're up to 10 million, 50 million meters per square, which means if you've ever worked with rainwater harvesting, if you have a meter by meter square and 1 millimeter of rain, you get a liter. So all I have to do is apply the annual rainfall to this or the max 24-hour rain event, and I can understand what the flows might be running through this site. And if we take a look right in the center where that boundary is, there's 2 major drainages I'm going to be interested in. And we went and walked the site, and I was really keen to take a look if we could see those drainages. We went in fall, the second most wet season in this area, and there wasn't a lot of overland flow. If this site had survived my scrutiny, spoiler alert, it didn't, I would have gone back and taken a look in the melt as well. So Neil, as we go on to the next one here, we'll see that we've gone on to radiation. And radiation, solar radiation is important because, again, the context of this site was this client was very keen to create a community. They wanted to have a place where a number of people could live, and they wanted potentially to be accessible to photovoltaic or solar hot water or other solar-based systems. So again, wattage per meter square is an exceptional way to understand, in a general sense, of placement. As we get down to the details, we do a specific site solar analysis to understand what the potential is and placement. But so far, good conversation coming from this aspect. As we move on to the next slide, you'll see that aspect is actually the data overlay. And that data overlay of aspect shows us north, south, east, and west. North being blue, and that's the majority of the site. So it doesn't have exactly the perfect aspect, and we're already in a cool place. Sometimes there's a lot of value in north aspect, especially if we're in places where we need to have cool or chill. But generally, this is a north-facing site with a little bit of south, and that's about it. So again, really, really important aspect to bring in is aspect. There's a lot of aspect there. It's kind of like a Malkovich movie, Malkovich. But aspect is important because we understand where is the topography facing and what direction. Neil, I'll get you over to the next one if you would, mate. Next one should be, now I'm going off of memory. There we go, slope. So especially if we're working in broad scale or if we're working with tractors or implements or roads, slope lets us know what's permissible and what's not permissible. The majority of this site was between 0 to 12 degrees, 12 being starting to get into the danger zone, 0 definitely being in the green, and the majority of this was in the 0 zone. Walking the site, I can, again, ground truth this data and go, yeah, absolutely. Everything I saw on this display, on this overlay, made really good sense. As we go to the next slide, we'll see that we started to take a look a little bit more specifically at conversations of access. So how is this site accessed off of the highway? Where are the gates? What's secondary access look like? So we have to get a big, broad sense. And again, if you're new to permaculture, or if you've just kind of jumped into it, maybe your permaculture design course wasn't really focused on design as the Oregon State University course is, or courses that Neil and I put on, access is hyper important. What's the grade of it? What's it look like? Is there any detriments to it? All very important pieces. Neil, I'll get you to go on to the next one if you would. So what was really important here was to drill down into the details, because that slope really started to worry me. So I drilled down to the details, found a couple of the old maps that showed where that slide was and where it was coming from, and was able to see that, sure enough, we were in an issue because the slide debris, you can kind of see that arrow pointing, southeast limit of muddy debris, ran over this. And as I started to look at the geotechnical reports, we found that there was more than a number of folks who said there should be no permanent structures that were based in this area specifically. So immediately we get to a constraint, a big constraint. This is not a good place to place a home, a community. If you're thinking about potentially further seismic events, we're in British Columbia, we get them. Or if you're thinking of further slides. And as I looked further and further into the information, I found that slope A and a little bit of the pre-existing slide both had major issues. And so I was able to pass that on to the client, and they were running down the road of buying this for about $250,000. And we were able to pull back from this without ever having to jump into actually purchasing and having to worry about what we're going to do with it. So again, a couple $1,000s of pre-purchase assessment of a little bit of diagnostics can save you not 10 times, but 100 times, 1,000 times what we put into this work. So what we did is we pulled way back out to the valley. And Neil, I'm going to ask you to just quickly scroll through these, like maybe pause for a second or two on each one and just keep moving, and that'll keep us moving along here. Took a look at the entire site, took a look at that 20-meter contour, started to see a couple of places that were issue, took a look at the catchment again, wanted to understand the flow, look at aspect, where were some places that maybe had some more south, looked at hazards. This shows, the purple shows the alluvial fans, and the green, the blue shows the avalanche issues, and then came up with a couple of recommendations to allow them to find good places to then go back to and speak to the seller and find good places. You can see in the red there, we'll hold here. And the ones on the right were definitely had a lot of pluses and bonuses. Higher up on the landscape, a little bit of agricultural land, more solar exposure, overland flow of water, could have easement to the two drainages from left to right. Lots of great pieces there, but they were able to then go back to the seller and have a higher level of conversation. So folks, big lessons, big takeaways, get to why, really focus on diagnostics. Don't worry out front where the swales are going to go, where the plants are going to go. Make sure it's a good site first and foremost, and make sure it works for those three spheres, for the client, for the biophysical realities, and for the realities of the regulatory climate. I'm going to pass this over to Neil. Neil's going to talk about one of the major issues we see is that people stack way too many plants in a planting, can't access it well, can't harvest it well and cleanly so that way they have it for a long-term conversation, and then have to go back and take out a lot of plants which they spent time, money, and energy to put in the first place. Neil?
All right, thanks, Javan. So I'm coming to this from basically my personal experience. I'm a plant lover. I love diversity of plants. I love managing plants. I love taking care of all sorts of different things and learning and developing relationships with all the different types of plants that I can, seeing what will grow in an area and what won't. And so I got really inspired by the idea of the food forest and the edible forest garden when I first got into permaculture, and hyperstacking these to really create designer productive ecosystems. And based on that, and then managing those systems through time, I've sort of taken a step back, and now I focus much more on how can I make my time very efficient? How can I use and really leverage the permaculture principle of the least change for the greatest effect, or the greatest yield for the least effort? Those sorts of approaches to landscape design and maintenance. And what I've found particularly important is to simplify. For me, that's a constant mantra that I go back to. Is how can I make this simpler? How can I make this simpler? How can I make this very easy to understand, very easy to take care of? Because when we're dealing with ecosystems, we're dealing with very complex systems. And there's a lot of interconnections and relationships that we don't necessarily understand. And the simpler and more clear that we can make it while still being complex, the easier that we make our lives. And so I really like to go back to the permaculture principles of designing from pattern to detail, and focusing on things that are appropriate for specific scales. And then taking the 7-layer forest garden concept and applying that potentially at something like the site scale or even the farm scale, and simplifying it down to the individual plot or planting scale with usually using 2, 3, maybe 4 layers to make things very easy to manage. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and walk through some examples of this. All right, so let me know if you can see that. Just from beginning. All right, can folks see the slideshow now? Okay,
That's
great.
good, Neil.
Thumbs up. Awesome. So in general, these are the problems that I ran into and that I see often in beginning designers. If people are trying to put too many plants in a small space and too many different plants together in one area. You know, individual plants of different species. People don't think clearly about access, irrigation, and harvest management when they're designing guilds and plantings, especially for maintenance. You know, these long-term perennial systems, you're going to have to do pruning, you're going to have to do harvest, you're going to have to do cleanup, all these different things throughout the year. So, you know, sequencing things so that they work from a temporal and spatial standpoint is important. And then often plants aren't clumped effectively. And clumping plants not only provides ease of harvest, but it also increases the ecological function. Pollinators, birds, other sorts of animals have a much easier time finding a group or a cluster of plantings, especially something, you know, that's flowering. If you've got 4 or 5 plants next to each other that are all flowering at once, that are the same flower, it's very easy for them to find. They can get a lot of beneficial habitat and food from that. So those sorts of things line up both with ecology as well as harvest and maintenance. And that's where we really start to get that synergy of stacking functions. If you stack too many functions that don't have beneficial relationships, you start to get diminishing returns and actually decrease in your yield for your effort. So that's the kind of nuance and why stepping back to a kind of a simplicity, keep it simple type of standpoint and approach is really important in my opinion. So some of the responses we take this is that I encourage people, and in my designs, I'm using fewer layers, kind of 2 to 4 maximum layers out of the forest garden 7 layers. I'm clumping plants in groups of 3 or more for clean harvest efficiency and ecological function, and I'm maintaining wide, easy access when appropriate. You're not necessarily in an intensive annual garden where you need to maximize square footage of bed space, but especially for my main zone 1 pass, places I walk every day in the perennial systems, I'm looking at wide, easy access. So this is an example that I'm drawing from the Getty Via. It's in coastal California, Santa Monica area. So it's a Mediterranean climate, and it's a landscape architecture type of design situation, but I think it's a fantastic example of a very simple, very clear design of a multi-layer food forest. It's got the fruit tree layer, it has the small shrub layer, and then it also has the ground cover layer. So some of the shrubs are herbs and some are shrubs, but if we take a quick look at it, you know, we have 1 fruit tree in a block, and then under that we have a nice, clear, clean patch of a culinary sage herb that looks like a fig tree, a culinary sage herb, and then a perimeter or edging ground cover of something like thyme. And so the benefits of this is that the space is completely filled. You're not going to get a lot of weeds. If you do, it's easy to see and manage them. You're going to get clean harvest. You're going to get blooming all at once. So you get a large amount of pollinators that zoom into that culinary stage all at once. Also with the thyme, you get blooming all at once. And your harvest timing is going to happen all at once for each species as well. So you can move cleanly and quickly through the space, do your management, your maintenance, and or your harvest, and get beneficial ecological function all very easily. And it's easy to access and prune and harvest the fruit tree as well, without something like a shrub or another tree getting in the way. And then they have big open paths where people can gather and walk. Now you don't have to use something like you know, necessarily a straight line rectilinear type of pattern layout, but the clumping and the organization of the layers is really clear and easy to manage in this sort of scenario. So just a zoom in on that. You know, here's just getting established. You can see how easy it is to see the weeds. All right, we're just going to get rid of all that. You know, that's simple because they have a clean single species of planting. If they're going to plant different species, it's another block. So blocks, clusters, clumps, groups, or rows, as opposed to individual plants or plant species checkerboarded throughout the landscape and intermixed in a very intensive polyculture. So this is a great example of a 3-layer polyculture. You can see a clean, clear trunk, easy to maintain, easy to inspect for disease or pest or anything like that. And everything else is very easy to find and quick to work with. So you don't have to try and think about, what have I got to do here? What about this other little piece? Or am I going to get something mixed up in my harvest? And that to me is really critical and what I'm trying to encourage people to work towards. So here's my site. This was when we first moved to it 10 years ago. And then here's a more recent aerial photo with some contour elevation maps. Those are 2-foot contours. So you can see it's relatively flat. And I'm going to walk you through 3 locations that are near my house and then one that's a little bit further away. So we have 2 that are in zone 1, one that's in the center of activity where we walk basically every day or multiple times a day. Number 3 is in zone 2. I visit it once or twice a week. And number 4 is on the edge of permaculture zone 2, zone 3. So I'm visiting that, once or twice a week, maybe once a month, depending on the specifics. So we'll go into guilds and locations in each of those. And the way that I developed my site was initially, I planted it very densely in very complex patterns. And what I'm working towards now is simplifying and stepping back. And how do I take that and adapt it to something that's streamlined and easy to work with? So this is right outside my front door, path to our driveway, and planted a row of oregano on both sides. Very easy to see, relatively easy to harvest. It's got a gooseberry behind it. Some other plants have intermingled, some annuals and stuff that need to be cleaned out. But this is just before flowering, our onset of flowering, so perfect time to harvest for culinary herbs. A little bit early if I want to get the pollinators, or I could leave it to grow for pollinators. Now, one of the benefits of having plants as individual species is you can get clean harvest. What you want when you're harvesting, obviously, is you don't want any contamination, especially if you're going to be selling, right? So, or processing the plants, and even if for home yield, you just want it to be clean, easy to work with, high quality material. So, no grass, no other materials in except for the actual harvested material. Here's an example of just an annual garden. And again, looking at clumping, right? So one species or one cultivar in each area makes it easy to harvest. Also, for an annual garden, when it's done, it's easy to clean out and replant the next type. So, we have garlic in one section, mustard in one section, pak choi in one section, so on and so forth. And I think that's a valuable lesson to take and expand out into the perennial setting, where things last a lot longer. So any inefficiencies in designs add up in maintenance and harvest time much more through the compounding process of year after year labor that you have to do. So it becomes more critical rather than less important to do at that type of planting, the perennial plantings. So here's an example of both an annual garden here in blue with a clump of basil, a clump of eggplants, and a clump of basil surrounding it. So I can get a little bit of diversity, but again, ease of harvest. I can just take even a drill type of harvester and come across this basil and harvest it all into a bucket quickly and easily, or I can take shears or however I want to harvest it. I can harvest it quickly and easily, remove the flowers easily that way. I have a pollinator patch here of bee balm in one section of it, as well in the pink, and Maximilian sunflower in another section of it. And then I have a cluster here in the purple where you can see an edging of chives around my gray water basin, which is also surrounded by a couple of perennial shrubs, and we'll zoom in on that in a second. So here's what the bee balm looks like when it's flowering and blooming. And this is a good example of why you want to plant something in a large cluster. You can see there's a bumblebee right here. At this time, there's this heavy utilization of the bee balm. There's lots of bumblebees around. This is the only one I was able to really get in the photo effectively. But you can see that it's a big, clear landing patch. There's a lot of nectar and food supply for the pollinators. Also, if I want to harvest it as cut flowers, very easy to harvest a lot of cut flowers quickly and easily, get them bundled up, take them to point of sale. So again, just simplify, single species and clumps, diversity at a little bit larger scale. So here's a little bit later in the year, the same plants. You can see the basil's grown up. We've already cut the flowers once. The bee balm's gone through flowering, and now the Maximilian sunflowers started to flower. And the chives have moved to the point where some other things are integrated with them, and they need to be maintained, and some of the annuals need to be removed. So we're going to zoom in there. So we have a little bit of beneficial annuals. Luckily, my maintenance can be my hardest in this sort of scenario. So arugula, parsley, I do have a perennial lovage and some catnip over there, as well as there's a Cleum cellulosa Rocky Mountain bee plant. So I'm trying to clean out the plants that are crowding in order to continue to maintain ease of harvest. And at the same time, I'm sorting and grading as I go into different containers for different yields so that I can manage them, keep them clean and easy to use. So you can see now I've cleaned it. I've got my yields in my buckets. I've got 2 gooseberry plants that are now very easy to see with the perimeter of chives as the boundary, and a pear tree as I step back. So you can see that there's some space there. The pear tree pruned up in its trunk to the height of the top of the gooseberry plants. The chives have laid down at this point, so it's easy to get in and harvest the gooseberries. If we take a step to the gooseberry harvest, you can see now it's easy to see the berries, and it's easy to harvest them in a relatively clean manner. Again, we want that ease of processing from garden to table, or garden to storage, or garden to point of sale. And any excess will go right over the fence into the chickens, and then the rest of this will go into drying racks. Again, directly from harvest to an easy point of processing and then point of use or storage. So we're catching and storing the harvest, and we're streamlining that work. It's very easy to get in here with a wheelbarrow. If I need to trim the chives to get them to bloom again, I can just now take even a weed whacker across it and not be worried about it. Or I can do it by hand with a sickle or something like that. So here's a different example. Now that was plot 2. This will be plot 3. This is in my zone 2. I use it a little bit less. And so I have a more mixed type of food forest with fruit trees planted, as well as culinary herbs, berries, and ground covers. This area in red are native plants, sagebrush and rabbit brush. Originally, I interplanted with them and left them there, but now I'm needing to open this up for access and maintenance. So what I did was I just went ahead and I chopped that down, laid it on the ground. This is one of the few times when I have found hugelkultur type of approach to be really effective, is that when I have a lot of woody debris I need to deal with, I'll just lay it down on the ground and cover it up. We have horses, so I just cover it with horse manure. And that is much easier for me to deal with than something like chipping and shredding it. I don't need a big machine or anything like that. But I basically have laid that down and created a pathway. I have a cluster here of ground cover thyme that I'll show you. And then I've opened it up around this fruit tree. I have a row of fruit trees here with single ground cover or herbaceous plants underneath. This one's a perennial arugula, Sylvetta arugula. And I've left the natives here on the edge as a perimeter hedgerow. So I've moved back to a pattern level where I have a perimeter hedgerow. I have 2 or 3 layers with fruit tree, herbaceous layer, and potentially a shrub layer in there. And I've eliminated the 7 layer at kind of the plot scale. You can see now I've increased my access. So zooming into where I've laid down the shrubs, you can see again, here's the thyme is one big clump, easy to take a sickle straight across and harvest. The other side has, so this is a German thyme, a ground cover thyme. The other side has a French and English type of thyme. So it's a little shrub thyme, also easy to harvest. Stepping back a little bit more from that area, this is a nursery bed where I planted grafted fruit trees and then I'm transplanting out of. So the trees are a little close together, but I'm slowly moving those trees out to leave just 1 or 2 fruit trees in here. Pears, they're relatively columnar. And then the understory of this is ice plant. So it's a succulent understory to insulate the ground, as well as it provides some great flowers, and an herbaceous layer of some bee balm. But again, in clumps or clusters, single understory, single type of fruit tree, and then an herbaceous plant, similar to the Getty VM model. And then I also have the perimeter hedgerow of the perennials surrounding it, kind of anchoring the system with natives and creating a nice clean edge. So this is the area that's between, on the border of zone 2 and zone 3, near the edge of my property. Here would be kind of the border pathway between Zone 2, which has more intensively planted fruit trees and production herbs, and Zone 3, which is geared more towards windbreak and shelter and providing a little bit more ecological function to the landscape. And so for Zone 3, I've left, again, the perimeter hedgerow of native shrubs just to anchor the ecosystem. They take 0 inputs. And then I've opened up pathways and planted rows of trees as windbreak. So this is a 3-row windbreak, taller shrubs just downwind from the perimeter hedgerow, and then a layer of more productive shrubs in a row, one more row downwind. And something that's important to consider here is that there's a utility line overhead. And so these shrubs are all designed and selected to be under 18 feet tall, so they never get up into the utility line. And I've left a road as an easement to be able to manage and maintain that utility line. And you can see there's easy access through the rows, so I can get in and manage and maintain them quickly, because I only visit it, maybe once a month. I want to make sure that I can get in and do all my work rapidly and be done. So that's the end of my presentation. I think now we'll take some questions and answers, and I'll hand it back to Javan.
Thanks, Neil. I love seeing those examples step by step. You get somebody like Neil from a science background, took a PDC, was like, let's stack this. And then as you started to use it, you realized it was problematic going forward. And I think that's really important to see these systems in practicality and how they work. One of the things that Neil picked up, I think, which was brilliant, was how do you get clean material? Because that material then has to be processed, and it's an important piece, and I think you demonstrated it really well. Thanks so much, Neil, and thanks so much, everybody, for staying with us. It's been high numbers all the way through. I've been answering questions, so if there are questions and you want them answered, we can put them in there. Just briefly, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the mentorship program that Neil and I have coming up, and then we'll chat a little bit about some question and answers. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them down. So Neil and I, because we've worked in permaculture design certificates for so long, and we've doing it quite routinely with the Oregon State University course, we found that there's a big gap, and I found it 10 years ago when I started my permaculture journey. There really isn't good mentorship out there. There's not programs or processes or individuals who can dedicate a lot of time and energy to answering some of the questions after a theory-laden course. How do I actually do this? How does this go into process, into play? How do I diagnose more properly? Or at the installation, how do I install irrigation, for example? So Neil and I were brainstorming, and we came up with this idea of a 3-month mentorship starting March 5th, twice a week, an hour and a half live conversation like this, and then an hour and a half on a private forum. And basically it's a no holds bar, ask any question. You got designs you want reviewed, you got questions you want answered, you have conversations or questions about specific concepts. We'll go through and we'll do it exactly there. A program specifically tailored to you, the questions you have, complete customization. If you've ever taken an advanced course and walked into the course and known 50, 60, 70% and thought, okay, there's some good nuggets here. In this course, everything you bring, all the questions you need answered are the questions we will address. Not to mention you'll have access to a number of the resources that we access and work with. So Neil and I will be providing that. So we start March 5th. We go until May, I believe 14th is when we go. And it'll be a fantastic time and opportunity. If you were going to try and get 36 hours of mentorship, paying at a professional rate, you'd be anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000, depending on the amount of time and energy. But we've tried to make this as affordable as possible for folks. And for anybody on this webinar, it's even a tiny bit more affordable because the coupon code I just put into the chat bar allows another $200 off the total price. That code is for you guys. If anybody is interested in playing and conversing and doing some mentorship with us over March, April, and May, great time to do it as we're coming into the spring. It would be fantastic to have you in the course. If you're confused, if you're worried, I don't know if this is actually, if I'm a good fit for this, I wonder if I'm at the right place, feel free to drop me an email, javan@allpointsdesign.ca. I'm sure Neil will throw that into the chat for me. Feel free to drop me a line. I'd be happy to chat with you about any questions, or if you think somebody else is a good fit for this, feel free to pass the program on. We've never seen something like this that is so focused and specific to individuals. And we're really excited to offer it. If you're thinking spring doesn't work, we've had a number of folks who were interested in the fall. There is indeed a fall sign up that's available, and hopefully I'll get Neil to grab that fall sign up link and throw it in there as well. So if folks are interested, they can sign up for the fall to be known when it's there. If you have any questions about the mentorship program, let us know. But I'm going to walk back through some of the questions and answers. And if anybody has any new questions, feel free to put them down. So Carol, not a design question, but looking for ideas about composting in bear country. I live in bear country. I understand this. Great question, Carol. A few options. Composting in trenches. This is something I found in a number of the places where I was in bear country, using the pathways in between different perennials or even in annuals and digging your compost into the ground or into the mulch. If it's mulch, I recommend about a foot down. I find that the woody material really does help to break down that material quickly and mask some of the smell. A bear sense of smell is extraordinary, so not all of it. But when it's down, I didn't find a lot of problems with that. That's sort of the low energy solution that I found. Second, using a traditional composting 3-bin and working with solar electric fencing and a backup power supply. We're going to be moving to that this year just because we're going to be moving further into human ear composting, and that's something I want no one messing around with. So we'll be moving to a nice deterrent for bears and people and otherwise. Bokashi, so if you use anaerobic, I think that's how you say the word, composting, you can use a metal bin, and that was really successful in a couple projects in Alberta where we dug into the ground, we took metal bins, and we had them with lids on top, and basically used a bit of bokashi, but a bit of anaerobic as well, and allowed that to decompose within that bin that was relatively bear-proof. And last but not least, of course, vermicomposting, so composting inside the building. When you get to vegetative matter, I don't find that vegetative matter is really disturbed by bears or pests all that much. Rats like to make nests in them, so I tend to use a hardware cloth around my 3 bins, but generally we tend to keep it quite good that way. A lot of questions about the different tools I was talking about. So the tools I was talking about was Google Earth Pro, and again, if you go into the Q&A and click on Answered, you'll see all the questions I'm reading off of. Google Earth Pro, free for everybody. QGIS, also freeware. Lots of online tutorials. ArcGIS is paid, but it's a bit more streamlined. And the data set was from the NASA 2000 Shuttle Radar Topography mission. And Eleanor, I think, grabbed the link for us there. So thanks, Eleanor, for that. Another question about that. Is it possible for the recording? Yes, indeed. We've been told by Lindsay, who's in the background. Thanks so much for everything you've done, Lindsay. It's been fantastic to have all your support. We've been told by Lindsay that everyone will get an email who's been on or signed up, and they'll get access to this webinar afterwards. So we're going to go back to the Q&A and just jump in a little bit more. Mateo, Javan, when using QGIS for water management, are you using some of the grass tools? Do you have the path for processing the waterways by catchment size? Yeah, you do, and it's basically you can take the arms themselves and you can take them specifically. So it works out that way, and it works out really well. Thanks for the question, Mateo. And then Donna, I'm curious about food forests since many food plants need full or near sun. Oh, no open questions.
Sorry, I answered it.
Oh, nice. Oh, perfect, Neil. Take it away. I don't have to do them all. Go for it, man.
So I think your intuition's right on there, Donna. You're going to want to, one of the reasons to increase the spacing is to allow more sunlight penetration into the understory. It's slightly dependent on what your incoming solar radiation is. If you're at a lower solar radiation location, like a higher latitude, then you need more sun penetration. If you're at a higher elevation where ultraviolet can be an issue, then shading can be valuable. Or if you're in a more tropical type of latitude where high solar radiation is an issue, then some shading can be a benefit. But allowing, and then you need to select plants that tolerate the sun load that they're getting well. So if you have understories with more shade, then you're going to want to select plants that are a little bit more shade tolerant, that thrive in part shade. So you could consider doing something like a clump or a cluster on the sun side of a tree and a different species on the shade side of a tree, but that still gives you that ease of harvesting, clumping, clustering type of pattern, and also integrates the solar needs of the plants. And then secondarily, yeah, tree roots definitely will compete with other plants for water and nutrients. And so it's important to integrate that. That's why I really like to emphasize something like a tree layer with a ground cover layer, right? And both are multifunctional elements where I'm getting yields out of them. But the ground covers generally are shallow rooted, whereas trees are mostly deep rooted. So you have a lot lower level of competition for water and nutrients in that case. So you want to think about the below ground stratification of roots and resource partitioning, as well as the above ground when you're designing these types of fields.
Awesome answer. Thanks, Neil. So again, folks, thanks so much for joining us. If you have any other questions while we're wrapping up, feel free to put in. I really appreciate if everybody put one thing they were taking away from the webinar, a thought or an idea, a connection point. It'd be great to see that in the chat bar as we wrap up. And just wanted to say again, thanks so much to Lindsay and the Permaculture Skills Center and the conversation we've had here, as well as just all the individuals who decide to show up. We need as many people riding this wave that's here and is growing as possible. And we appreciate you guys taking the time out of your lives to jump in with us today. It's great to have you here. If you want more of this, if you want this type of interaction on a twice weekly basis starting March 5th, it would be fantastic to have you involved. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk more, if you're a good fit and a good conversation. It was fantastic to see a number of folks already reaching out and the course already starting to get a good growing conversation going. So great to have everybody there. And if you are interested, feel free to reach out. Donna, very much appreciated the depth and breadth of knowledge of both of you in the OSU PDC class. As I watched the how-to videos for the course and now this class, I wonder if an additional class could be offered like design that might include, yeah, for sure. That's a big thing, Donna. And if you're keen to do that, and if you wanted to do that in the course or in the mentorship program, we'd be happy to facilitate you through that conversation over the 12 weeks. The great thing about this mentorship is that if your specifics are, you really want to know more about how to do this work, we can walk you through it. We can do it live with you, tailored to you in the way that you want. So it'd be great to have that conversation with you further if you're keen. And Tin, just a heads up, there's a serious need for permaculture folks to be involved in coconut producers. They need to figure out how to get back to shady. Yeah, absolutely. And the folks at Terragenesis and Georgi Pavlov and Agrarians are doing some great work down there as well. So fantastic to have everybody doing that type of work. I'm just going to read out some of the things that folks are saying. Thanks so much for everybody putting this on. Thanks so much for that. Love the map analysis. Thanks, Sandra. Simplifying the design and thinking ahead of as far as plants will develop and how that influences. Also the importance of designing and diagnosing the land before implementing the action. Thanks, Mateo. Daryl, going to explore Google Earth Pro and QGIS, creating contours. Fantastic. Naomi, emphasis and reminding about simplifying, clumping, grouping, less layers, clean harvest, super helpful. Thanks so much, Naomi, and thanks to Neil. Sven, really want to geek out about learning more about how you use the Agrarian's file structure in GE, as well as understanding how to better use QGIS. Definitely going to rewatch this video. Thanks, Sven. Sven's an amazing designer. Love seeing his work and his enthusiasm. Thanks for the time and effort. I appreciate the tips about clumping plants and not overplanting. Check out QGIS. Thanks, Jason. Doing a permaculture course with UBC in June. Oh, fantastic. I will be a part of that. You guys will see me July 15th. I'm doing a fire resiliency conversation in life design. So it'll be great to be in the course with you there, Mr. 520-245-370. Chalet, thanks, Neil and Javan. Sorry I was late. Trouble getting the email link. Takeaway technical tools and links. Hope to utilize it on a smaller scale. Chalet's an incredible designer from Kamloops. Award-winning designs. I've worked with her a few times. She's fantastic. Christopher Rowe, from my experience, mentorship with Javan is a super worthwhile. Thanks, Chris. That's super kind of you. Really appreciate the concept of utilizing an engineering geomorphic map as a part of your design process. This is a starting point for all the watershed restoration projects I work with. Not seen this in the permaculture and regenerative land planning. Thanks, Chris. That's a big difference about how Neil and I work. We have a very open toolbox, more tools than I think a lot of people realize that are out there because we are so open. And it's been very enjoyable to do that kind of work. So Goonie, Brian, thank guys. I'll pass this on to some designer friends. We'll discuss with Betty about joining the program. We were looking at trying out Google Earth and QGIS. Had some technical problems last time we tried. Yeah, fair enough. Nora, thanks for all the great info. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. We're only 8 minutes over. I feel like that's a stunning success for webinars. Please do reach out if you're keen and you'd like to chat. Reach out on Facebook. Reach out by my email. Feel free to check out allpointsdesign.ca or the upcoming Facing Fire documentary. It's been so much fun to work on that. And check out RT Permaculture. Neil does incredible work. If you're down in the States, you're looking for a dedicated designer, if you're looking for mentorship, it would be fantastic to work with you. Neil, any closing remarks?
I just want to remind folks that we're offering the Land Design Mentorship Program, and that anyone who attended this webinar has access to the discount code for $200 off. It's good from now until the end of registration, which ends on March 3rd. And I'll just put that discount code in the chat bar again, and the link to the Land Design Mentorship page for folks, just in case they want to take a look and learn more about it from the landing page. And awesome. I wanted to say thanks so much to everyone for participating. My passion is more people doing good work on the planet and making their livelihoods doing it. So the more that we can work together to empower each other to be able to make that a reality, the more exciting life will be for all of us. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.